What's up, everybody? How's it going? How you doing, everybody in chat? It's Tuesday. We're getting tactical once again, and we've got an interesting show today because today, or I guess yesterday technically, but today is the dawn of the T5S2 Invitational Season 6, and that is what we're going to be doing. Nurgle Mad in chat, how's it going? Like the VOD or get wrecked. There you go. Are there any custodies lists? We're not talking about custodies today, chat. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to announce to everyone. I apologize, but that's up to the players, and they didn't want to do it. So, you know, there you go. Hope everyone enjoyed my coverage of Captain Con over the weekend. I had a really good weekend live streaming Captain Con, the Captain Con GT. Had 60 players, played 5 games of 40k, and I think, in my humble opinion, the games that I streamed over the weekend were some of the best in-person 40k that I've ever streamed. Literally every single game was like a nail-biter that came down to, it was either sort of executed perfectly and had really interesting strategies enacted in it, or had some... was just insanely tense and super close between the players. So if you haven't checked out my games that I streamed from Captain Con, the VODs are in the live section over on the YouTube channel. Please go check them out because all of them were insane. I won't spoil who won, all the winners and that stuff, but absolutely go check them out. They were super duper sick. Hey, thanks everybody. Yeah, thanks for glad everybody enjoyed it. Day 1 was good. Yeah, day 1 was crazy. Day 1 was sometimes like day 1 of a GT. You get kind of, you know, sometimes it's a wishy-washy. You get like interesting lists on, and the play skills maybe not there. Or you had like they had unbalanced matchups or whatever. But we had lists that were both interesting and had really good games, which is always what you want to see happen. Yeah, it was almost everything worked without a hitch, which is always exciting to me. That's my favorite part. Yeah, and it was absolutely sick. The Custodies game, oh yeah, on day 1 was amazing. Yeah, we called it on one hand and then it sort of like reversed at the end. Absolutely crazy. All right, yeah, everybody go watch that one. Seriously, the games were sick. Anyway, we have more games coming up, everybody. If you checked it out over in the live section, you might notice that we have a bunch of live streams scheduled, and that's because the next 2 weeks or so, are going to be the T5S2 Season 6 Invitational. So for those who don't know, I run a lot of games on Tabletop Simulator. You probably know that by now. You can head over to tts40k.com. That's the website we're on right now. And all the information about that is there. T5S2 is an online tournament circuit. It takes scores from events run on Tabletop Simulator, and it works kind of like the ITC. You get points based on your placing and the number of players in an event. Every season, which is 6 months, we take the top 16 of those and they get invites to the seasonal invitational. This season we're doing a bracket system. You can actually take a look at the bracket down here. So these 16 players have been arranged based on their final placement, and then they'll play in a bracket until we have a season champion who gets all sorts of fun accolades and prizes and stuff. So all of the games, or just about all of the games, will be live streamed, both here on the TacticalTortoise YouTube channel and on TacticalTortoise TV over on Twitch. They're going to be multi-streamed, so however you want to interact with it, you can pick your way to do it. And they're going to be... We just talked about how great the games at CaptainCon was. These are some of the best players in the world. There's a lot of WTC team members on here. There's a lot of highly competitive teams that put a ton of time into competing in Tabletop Simulator 40k, and generally the best players in those teams have qualified to get into the Invitational. So we have some insane games of 40k every year, and the first 2 rounds are going to go on over the next 2 weeks. So all 8 games of the 16 players paired, and then that will get shrunk into 4 next week over the course of the week. Then there's a little bit of a break. End of February, we take a weekend and stream the semifinals on a Saturday, and then the finals on Sunday. The schedule is a little bit elongated because it is an international event, so we give the players a lot of time to be able to schedule their games and work around time zones and things like that. But all of the games are going to be on this schedule here. So if you check out tts40k.com/invitational, this has the streaming schedule. So you can find links to the YouTube live stream, the scheduled live stream, as well as the matchups date and time. And you can come hang out with me and watch them. So it is going to be awesome. Bright and early Wednesday, the 8th of February, is going to be the first game. We did have a little bit of a playoffs game. I don't think that's made it to the TacticalTortoise TV YouTube channel yet, but that was versus Indicius versus Cmob. Both those players had tied to get to an invite. A couple players had declined their invites, so they were a couple places down, and they were tied with exact scores, which I don't think we'd ever had before. So we had them play off to get the invite. That was a little bit of a I guess, preview of the tournament format. It is using the most recent map pool for T5S2 Season 7, which is based on the WTC maps. The layouts are basically identical. The terrain on top of the ruins is a little bit different, but otherwise it's identical. Tickwall, thanks for the sponsorship, my guy. Really appreciate you. And that's what's going on. So 7:30 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time tomorrow is going to be the first game. We then have one tomorrow night. That one's much later, 9:30 p.m. So we got one early morning, one late at night, and then moving on from that, Friday, we have nothing Thursday. Everyone sort of pushed their games to Friday. Then we have a couple games going on Friday. We're actually going to multicast 2 games together around noontime U.S. Eastern Time. We have one at midnight Friday, and then Saturday, or I guess midnight Saturday morning, and then another one Saturday. The last game of round 1 is scheduled for Monday. That's going to be at noontime U.S. Eastern, and from there, the round 2 games will start to get scheduled, so we'll probably have games being added to the schedule as it goes. All of those VODs are also going to be available on the YouTube immediately. You don't have to wait to be a Twitch subscriber or anything. Those are, obviously, they're going to be streamed to YouTube, so they'll just be saved at these links, so you can go watch them. And yeah, I'm psyched. I think the games are going to be absolutely incredible. It doesn't look like my chat is working here, everybody. I'm going to, at least on the stream, I'm going to see if I can fix that real quick before I move on. And then what we're going to be doing today is just going through the lists that have been submitted to the Invitational, and a little bit of what we can glean from them. We are two weeks into sort of competitive Arks of Omen, so we're getting a little bit more of an idea of what Arks of Omen is going to be looking like, and I think it is pretty interesting. I don't know what's up with my chat bot here, everybody. Looks like it's broken, so I apologize people looking at the VOD, but you can look at the YouTube. Should be able to look at the YouTube live chat if you want to see people's comments. Yeah, so let's just go down the list. I think that's all of the housekeeping I have to talk about. That's basically what's going to be my life for the next couple of days. The regular content will be a little bit lighter for the next 2 weeks or so, just until we get out of the invitational season. I also have a couple games scheduled to stream myself, so if you want to head over to Twitch, those are going to be over on Twitch as normal throughout the whole thing. So anyway, everybody, let's jump into it. Now, we did a little bit different of a thing this season. You can see here we do have the mission lined out for all of the players, and this is the T5S2 Season 7 map pool like I talked about, which has a map layout that's set aside for each mission. Previously, we gave everybody the same mission each round. Instead, this time we're giving each bracket the same set of missions. So instead of playing the same mission 8 times in a row in the first round and then playing a different mission 4 times in a row for the second round, basically the missions have been distributed through the 4 brackets. So almost all the missions are represented between round 1 and round 2 between the different players and wherever they end up, whether they win or lose. So the missions are not laid out in the bracket here, but you'll be able to see them as they go up online on the schedule. Yeah, no. Well, there's Dark Angels, chat. No Iron Hands, I guess, is interesting, but there is Dark Angels. Yeah. So the breakdown: we have 2 Asuryani between MaxG from Tryhard Wargaming and Ashley Thompson from Tweem Uwu. 1 Tyranid, or 2 Tyranids, excuse me. 2 Chad Tyranid players over here. Cmob playing Tyranids. This is the listed Cmob played in the playoff game against Indicius, which is actually a Tyranid mirror match. Both players just agreed to play Tyranids for the post-nerf Tyranids for the playoff match, which is a little bit funny. And we'll see if Cmob can pull it out with Tyranids. I'm rooting for them. You got to root for the underdog here, but Tyranids, as the numbers are coming in, may literally be the worst army in 40k right now. So my hat's off to him for giving it a go. That's he's a braver man than I think. We have 2 Grey Knights as well. Patrick Prax playing Grey Knights as well as Headstrong down here from Xeno Petting Zoo. 1 Tau from Devin, our defending champion, or from season 4. Disappointing Salad is our defending champion from season 5, but he did not participate this season. Arne Zernt, who we haven't seen on the circuit for a while. I think he's been doing his own thing, but he was part of the season 1 invitational. He's on Chaos Demons and actually pure Slaanesh Chaos Demons, so a really interesting build. We have another list here from Wolfvonmibu, a little bit of a different variety of Tyranids. Our first Dark Angels in Jonah Brook. Now, we did unfortunately have to have a concession to begin with. Wolfvonmibu wasn't actually able to participate after accepting the invite and had to give up his game to Jonah. So Jonah is moving forward already. We're not going to be streaming that game. Danny P from who plays on WTC Team Poland and Tryhard Wargaming, playing Genestealer Cults, which I think is going to be a powerhouse faction in the Arks of Omen meta. A little bit of a sleeper, kind of a I don't know. They kind of came out of nowhere. I think everybody expected Genestealer Cults because they were trending upwards in Nephilim. People expected them to do well in Arks of Omen, or at least much better than they did in Nephilim. But I don't know if people expected how well they would be doing in Arks of Omen, because they may be one of the best factions in the game. Paper, Nicholas Lackner from WTC Team Netherlands is also on Dark Angels. Doots is playing Chaos Demons. This is a Disciples of Be'lakor list, so a little bit different than the Slaanesh Demons that we're going to talk about elsewhere. We do have a blast from the past over here. Josie C playing Necrons with a pretty interesting Necron build. Versus this matchup right here. I'm kind of excited for this one because this feels like kind of the last gasp of the Nephilim format. Necrons versus Adeptus Sororitas is a very common matchup from Nephilim, but I think we're not going to see quite as much of it in Arks of Omen. And then we have, this is probably going to be a little bit more of the face of Arks of Omen, AshC playing Orks versus Dylan Usher's Harlequins from Tryhard Wargaming. So I'm excited for all these games, chat. I think it's going to be awesome. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about individual Space Marine chapters all we want, chat. Space Marines are at the very least top 3 faction. I don't think it really matters that Imperial Fists don't do well. Like, nobody talks about how bad Iron Warriors are doing, right? Like, everyone just talks about Heretic Astartes. And I think it's, if you want to play Space Marines and you want to succeed, you're gonna paint your space. You'll take your yellow Space Marines and you'll play yellow Iron Hands or yellow, whatever. You'll take your yellow Space Marines and you'll put a different subfaction at the top of your list. And I think that's fine and perfectly acceptable. But yeah. Anyway, Let's talk about some lists. We'll just go from the top down. So Max Quiz over here. We're going back to an old Eldari staple. We're playing some Hail of Doom. So this did get a little bit of a nerf patch since the release of the Codex. Hail of Doom is a far-flung craft world sub-faction ability. It gives you Gene Rot Might on all of your hit rolls of 6 with shuriken weapons, so they convert into wound rolls, which automatically count as 6s, and then also automatically rend. Previously, you could take this alongside Masterful Shots, so your entire army ignored cover, and then also you could get Hail of Doom, and they changed it so Hail of Doom is all-consuming, so you only get one sub-faction ability if you pick it, which, to be fair, is fine because we no longer live in a universe of Armor of Contempt, and you used to kind of have to take the Masterful Shots alongside Hail of Doom because Armor of Contempt plus light cover was really brutal if you didn't get those rending hits, and even if you did get the rending hits, you would be basically reduced by 2 AP, so a Dire Avenger Shuriken Catapult rending on somebody would hit for only AP 2, and they would put like a Terminator to a 4+ save. And with the amount of work you put into getting the rending hits with the Hail of Doom, that was not great. So you were kind of locked into taking Masterful Shots. Now that Armor of Contempt's not in the metagame anymore, you're basically doing the same amount of damage to a unit in light cover as you were against somebody who had Armor of Contempt, and it was out in the open, so it's kind of similar. We do have a bunch of Skyrunner, or a bunch of Warlocks, excuse me. It looks like a 2-model Seer Council alongside 3 Warlock Skyrunners with a mix of Conceal, Reveal, Protect, and Jinx. A bunch of HQs, literally filled up the HQ slot. 3 Farseers, 2 Skyrunners, one with the Kurno's Bow, Mark of the Incomparable Hunter combo. So with Hail of Doom, this combo is especially powerful. It lets you, on a wound roll of 6, you automatically deal mortal wound in addition to normal damage. And Kurno's Bow converts all of your wound rolls, your successful wound rolls, into mortal wounds in addition, or on top of that. So if you get a 6 to hit with the Kurno's Bow, it converts into a 6 to wound, which turns into a mortal wound thanks to Kurno's Bow, and then also a mortal wound thanks to Mark of the Incomparable Hunter. You can also trigger it by just putting 6s either using Strands of Fate dice, either in the hit roll or the wound roll, since both of them will convert over. So that Farseer Skyrunner ends up plowing you for probably 2 to 4 mortal wounds every time it goes to shoot, in addition to doing its normal damage. So it also has Doom and Executioner. It's going to move up. It's going to, we could, if it's not dooming anything, or if you spend the CP to cast another power, you can Smite Executioner, Doom something, fire the Kurno's Bow. So you're probably doing 4 to 5 mortal wounds, depending on what you're hitting with your regular psychic powers. Then you're shooting somebody for another 4 mortal wounds. Then you're fire and fading out of danger. If you don't need to shoot your gun, you can also just quicken that guy away if you want to. But this guy basically like plows somebody for 10 mortal wounds, which is pretty good. We also have a Farseer Skyrunner with Will of Azurian, which is not a power I see taken as often as I think it should, because it's one of the most terrifying powers on Farseers that you can get. But I think it's just that the Farseers tend to be so competitive with each other for slots that you end up running out of powers to take it. And it's beyond Doom and Guide and the direct damage spells. It's not the one that you would take normally. But it gives a unit, I believe it's immunity to morale, and you get objective secured. And that one's really important because when you're talking about all of these Aspect Warrior units and Wind Riders, your ability to push objectives is extremely strong. So if you're, and especially in Arcs of Omen, people are disincentivized from taking a lot of, innately objective secured units. So if you're able to obsec your, these MSU Eldar units and then run them on or fire and fade them onto enemy objectives, you can really keep people off guard. And especially if you have small and fast units, like Aspect Warrior units and like Wind Riders. I don't believe there's a targeting restriction on the Will of Azurian. I think it's just core, but I'm gonna double check there just so I don't misspeak too hard. Yeah, it's only core units. So you can put it on the Wind Riders, which is why we see these multiple tiny Wind Rider units. I mean, they're not that tiny. They're 5 bikes apiece. But that lets that Farseer, you know, make them obsec, and then they can just bullet out like 22 inches plus a Fire and Fade. Now that you can use Fire and Fade multiple times a turn, or multiple times over a game, so you can go just astronomical distances, basically. So yeah, the list has 2 Ranger units in it, 1 big Dire Avenger squad and 2 smaller ones of 6. These guys are also great at just deep striking or reserving in and completing secondaries because they get the ability to fire in and perform their actions. 2 Shroud Runner units who got that nice little points reduction, although they're still incredibly efficient units. Even more so now. I think they were already seeing play, but they just got buffed for whatever reason. Single Viper to range out and do some sexy stuff. And then 3 units of 5 Wind Riders for all the reasons that we talked about before. There's 2 Falcons over here with Shuriken Cannons. These guys can embark the Dire Avengers, so we can turn 1 Deep Strike them and drop them out into the mid-board if we need to, or just deploy the Falcons normally and keep them safe until they need to jump out and jump on something. Once you Doom and Guide something, all of the Dire Avenger shots, the sort of the many tiny Shuriken Cannon shots, Shuriken Catapult shots, I should say, shooting at a big target with all the full rerolls and the auto wounding gets really, really brutal. So you don't actually need that many Dire Avengers to be doing to be trading significantly up past their points cost. Yeah, no Cannon Wind Rider squad for sure. Moving on, we can talk about Cmob. Cmob's Tyranids. It's got an interesting one. So it is it's a mixed Hive Fleet list. So it's using the myriad Hive Fleet mechanics, mostly to get access to the territorial instinct, the hunt biomorphology for territorial instincts, because it has a ton of big monsters in it, all of which are going to be 5 model objective secured. But it's also relying very heavily on Exocrines, which is kind of the only gun remaining in the Codex after all of the nerfs. And because of that, in lieu of any specific Hive Fleet, it's taking heightened reflexes as a second biomorphology. So that lets them, basically gives them the Ultramarines chapter tactic, so they can fall back and shoot at -1 to hit. The downside of Exocrines, obviously, is that when they get engaged, they just can't do anything. They can fall back, but then they can't shoot without any benefit like heightened reflexes, because their weapon is blast. So they can't fire it in melee despite being monsters, and they're not very good at melee. They only have 3 attacks. So even little chaff infantry will get up and engage them and give them a huge trouble. So I really like this combination. What you give up is access to any specific Hive Fleet sort of special abilities, so relics and warlord traits and psychic powers and stratagems. You don't get any of that, but you don't really need it if you're not building for it. We're running triple Neurothrope today, which I think is going to be a pretty common build in Tyranids. There's not much else that you want to be taking in this faction, so you just run a bunch of Neurothropes. They got a little bit of a points hike, but I don't think it was big enough to stop you from taking them. Interestingly, Cmob's also on a Winged Hive Tyrant still. No Tyrant Guard to protect him. But he is basically just going to be a big one-hit wonder. He does have adaptive biology on it, so it can he can try to make it defensive enough so it might survive a shooting phase and get a swing or a fight on death in the fight phase. But generally speaking, it's going to hit something and it's going to kill it, and it's probably going to die. But once you can't overrun that thing, it doesn't matter so much. But the fact that it's a 5 model objective secured monster means that it does probably flip an objective the turn that it goes in to do that, and that's probably good enough. Now, we can Synaptic Link our Onslaughts onto it really easily to make it advance in charge, because we have 3 Maleceptors in the list as well. So we're a total of 7 Psychers so far, so get your Abhor the Witch ready. Yeah, but I think just going to be kind of relying on the Maleceptor's tankiness to sit in the middle of the table. Maybe do some mortal wounds, but mostly just sit there making vulnerable saves, and hopefully you can push your opponent out on Primary. is gonna be the game plan. We do have a couple Genestealers in here for some forward deploy. I think you absolutely need forward deploy now in the meta. If you don't have like turn 1 anti-deep strike, anti-reserve screeners, you're just gonna lose a lot of matchups. A lot of Imperial lists are bringing in the Knights that can reserve in on turn 1. I mean, most Space Marine lists are bringing drop pods. Basically, every variety of army is having some form of early game aggression. You know, whether it's pregame moves or forward deploys or turn 1 deep strikes, and you need a way to prevent that from just ruining your army. So any angle at which you can't block off line of sight or something, you can just drop Genestealers down and prevent your opponent from coming and getting you. And then there's a single Pyrovore to do actions, and again, act as a little bit of a screen, and then a bunch of Exocrines. 3 Exocrines, 1 with Dermic Symbiosis, 1 with Ferocious Ammunition. This list is very cute. It's tons of invulnerable saves. It's tons of big monsters. It's immense amounts of OBSEC. If your list doesn't have OBSEC and you can't very quickly kill these Maleceptors, which not a lot of lists can, then you just die. You just lose on primary. And that's basically what this list is going to be trying to accomplish. It has just enough infantry, and especially because it has these Neurothropes who are also infantry, to like sort of lean on something like banners. It can get Warp Ritual really easily, and then you're just sort of hoping for another secondary to come your way. The secondary game for Tyranid is actually kind of easy in Arks of Omen. Feels a lot easier than it did previously for whatever reason. But, and I think that might just be because so many armies are so model heavy now that you can rely on kill focus secondaries to sort of shore up your game plan. But yeah, other than that, you're just hoping to beat your opponent on primary and hope that can overcome the fact that your army's not doing too much. It is it may be just bring it down bait, but also you have to kill the Maleceptors, and they're not easy. The Maleceptors themselves are only give up 3. So if you kill the Maleceptors and the Hive Tyrant, you've killed 11. And I think there's a lot of lists that are going to, if they cheat through the Maleceptors, they don't have the beef to kill the Exocrines as well. So I think the fact that it presents like a unified profile where you if you can't get through T8 and a 4+ invulnerable save, you can't kill the army. And it's so many wounds, and that profile's initially hard enough to kill that some armies may be able to kill the Maleceptors, but not quick enough for them to not lose on primary. I do worry a little bit that if the Maleceptors do go down, there's no backline, like there's nothing behind them. You're just relying on those Maleceptors to do their thing, and if they do, you win, and if they don't, you lose. But there you go. Be'lakor. They can transhuman, so Be'lakor's not actually that great at killing them. He's like 6 attacks. At least he gives himself rerolls, right? So that's good. But if he flubs 1 or 2 of the wound rolls, he probably doesn't kill them. Or if he flubs a couple of the wound rolls, I guess. Not to mention the fact that the amount of mortal wounds this list has actually just probably rinses Be'lakor as soon as he commits. So he could go in and kill 1 Maleceptor, and then he's dead. He's gone. That guy's not surviving. Moirax Rad Cleansers, that is a solid combo. They can transhuman against that too, so that's pretty good. But otherwise, the 2+ poison's pretty brutal. If you can put the Maleceptors, just like if you can take advantage of the 3+ armor save, they die really easily, it turns out. But if you're taking big, like low volume anti-tank weapons, the Maleceptors actually may just tank you. Death Guard with Nurgle Demons for forward deploy. Yeah, I like that. I think including a Nurgle Patrol is pretty good. The problem is fitting the Nurglings in the Patrol, because they don't count for your compulsory slot, so you need like you just need Poxwalkers, and that kind of sucks. So you win some, you lose some, I guess. 3 Exocrines could maybe drop Be'lakor. That feels like a gamble. I mean, who knows? They do what? They hit on 4s and wound on 4s into a 4+ save, and they're -1 damage. I don't know. Doesn't feel that good. We can rip the Band-Aid off with more Asuryani right here. Ashley Thompson also playing Asuryani. This is a little bit different. A similar style of list, but it's actually approaching It's approaching its abilities differently, which I appreciate. So, I mean, it turns out the Eldari Codex, especially once you... it's a fun fact, everybody, that if you don't nerf the core mechanics that a codex is based on, you can actually build a lot of different builds with those codexes. But if you like remove all of the core mechanics that a codex relies on to do its work, then it's pretty dead. So we didn't see Asuryani do too much recently. We saw a lot of Ynnari because it wasn't really focused on Fire and Fade. But as soon as you put Fire and Fade back into the codex as a tool, all of the units that are constructed to build up Fire and Fade actually start working much better. So this army is using Swift Strikes and Masterful Shots. So Swift Strikes allows it to battle focus after advancing. So you can get some really ludicrous just movement out of the army, where your models are at high base speed already, and they're going to be moving farther forward and then battle focusing even farther. So they kind of like move forward 2d6 inches, or they can bounce around terrain. It just gives you a ton of maneuverability when it comes to moving around terrain. They're also using Masterful Shots, so these ones are taking the Ignore Cover sub-faction ability. So unlike the other list we talked about, the Hail of Doom list we talked about, that one's relying on just raw damage, whereas this one's trying to get around your line of sight blockers. Even if you're in cover, it's still going to be able to punch through, which is pretty great. So it's got 1 Seer Council in it, and then 3 Phoenix Lords, which, is pretty cool. It's actually been a hot minute since I saw too many Phoenix Lords on the table, mostly because you can't take them in Ynnari, or at least not in Ynnari attachments. So many people have been rocking Ynnari, and if they don't want to pay the 2 CP for an auxiliary deep support, then they don't get any Phoenix Lords at all. And if you're playing Ynnari in Arcs of Bowman, you lose your Phoenix Lords totally, because you can only have the 1 detachment out of Ynnari, and they can't go in that detachment, so sorry. But the same is not true, obviously, for Craft Worlds, which is why we see Behareth, Janzar, and Maugan Ra in the detachment. Maugan Ra is a trip. I imagine, like, he's got a real good gun, he's character protectable, and he's objective secured, so he can hold down your backline objective. And even if he's just sitting by himself shooting at people, he takes 2 rounds of shooting to kill because he phase caps, and potentially 3 if he rises from the ashes. So he's probably an extremely good objective holder, and then the same goes for Behareth and Janzar. Obviously, Janzar's a little bit more fast. She she plays aggressively and steals objectives from you, given that all of the Phoenix Lords are obsec, and she can advance and charge. Behareth is Behareth. I think if you haven't experienced the pain, the absolute nightmare that is Bloody Berry over here, you'll see it soon enough. But yeah, he's gonna bounce around the table. He's gonna be almost literally impossible to kill, and he's just gonna continue to accrue damage and obsec on objectives over the course of the entire game. And make your opponent pull their hair out. I think Behareth's greatest ability is that he tilts your opponent directly into conceding the game. A lot of times. We then have a Farseer Skyrunner, but it's not running a Kurnos bow, which is interesting. So we are, taking Seer of the Shifting Vector, which I believe gives us additional Strands of Fate. Is that right? Excuse me. It gives you a 6+ CP regen. Then we have 2 Rangers, a little Corsair Void Weaver action. Some cheap objective holders. Much cheaper than Rangers, but they don't get forward deploy. But that's fine. And then a bunch of elites. So as befits most Eldar lists, tons and tons of elites for those Aspect Warriors. 3 units of Dire Avengers. 10 Dire Avengers apiece, so the max 30. Alongside 2 units of Howling Banshees, one with Piercing Strikes, the other one with Nerve Shredding Shriek to do Mortal Wound on the charge. And then 3 Warlock Skyrunners. 2 units of Shroud Runners, again, super efficient, and 3 Support Weapon D platforms. Or Support Weapon platforms with D cannons, I should say. Doesn't Swift Strike throw one that makes Swooping Hawkscober? I think it does, but we're just using it on Dire Avengers right now. Not really Not really banking on the Swooping Hawks, and I think part of that, I guess Swooping Hawks are a little bit better if you're taking Masterful Shots, because the fact that they're AP0, shooting at a 3+ save opponent in cover puts them on a 2+ save, and that's not great. But if you can ignore cover, they can shoot through it. But the fact that they're AP0, they went up in points cost, and we're going to be seeing a lot of heavy armor moving into the future. I think says that a lot of players are leaving Swooping Hawks at home. I still think they're worthwhile because, you know, being able to shoot every turn and be immune to damage is pretty good. But I can understand that you wouldn't want to pay the 7. I think there's 17 points a model now for a unit that is going to be bouncing off armor saves most of the time, which is fair. All right, moving on. We got some Grey Knights. The first of our Grey Knights players, Patrick Prax from Team Sweden, is rocking Grey Knights. Prescient Brethren is sort of the build du jour, the sub-faction du jour for Grey Knights. So it gives you not only on the Tech Marine, typically you get this Divination Warlord trait, which gives him the ability to do a psychic action to get command points back. But then also you get a 1 CP strap that rerolls your hit, rolls of 1 to hit and wound. So you have more CP to play with than other subfactions. And you can use that on buffing up your individual units that are just rocketing out. And so generally speaking, you want to be playing sort of the trading game where you're throwing these little 5-model Grey Knight units out, disrupting your opponent's scoring, and then the bulk of your list is sort of dominating the mid board with just tons of wounds of Dread Knights. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing here. So we do have a Librarian with Psychic Epitome, so he can do a bunch of damage. He's also a good outlet for Teleport Assault, because you can either just teleport him normally, or you can do a Gate of Infinity on him to port him across the table. And then between a Melt-A-Gun shot and a bunch of Psychic powers with +1 mortal wound that they deal from Psychic Epitome, he can probably score you that Teleport Assault. And if you can get that Teleport Assault off reliably, it's an easy max, because you only have to score it 3 times. It scores 5 points apiece. It is a little bit scary, because if you underswing with the teleporting unit or overswing with another unit, you can be lose the scoring pretty easily. But I think it depends on the opponent. And we're seeing right now a lot of armies are running like these little, like we said, you have to have that forward deploy deep strike screener, in part to prevent the teleports from Grey Knights from just absolutely destroying you. And those models are just going to be giving up that secondary very easily. So, you have 5 Rangers, you have 5 Genestealers standing out in the middle. Your opponent just declares a teleport strike, either with a personal teleporter from a Dread Knight or an Interceptor squad or a Gate of Infinity. They just jump up near your unit somewhere close by. Doesn't even have to be that close, just has to be in weapons range. Maybe drop a smite or 2 on you to reduce the size of the unit and then shoot you to death with the silencer, and boom, 5 points. We did it. So as long as you can set that up, that's pretty good. Kaldor Dragos making his appearance, give some people some rerolls. 2 strike squads in the troop slot, 1 unit of servitors, and then, oh, look at that, 30 interceptors. We're doing it. So they all are gonna split into combat squads. So we have 6 units of 5 interceptors to get that 12-inch move, so they can trade for objectives with people. If you don't put super duper heavy armor on an objective, you're gonna get shot by all these Nemesis Dread Knights, 2 Nemesis Dread Knights, plus a ton of interceptors are gonna charge you. And so I guess it's 3 Nemesis Dread Knights total, because there is a Nemesis Dread Knight Grandmaster. And then they're just gonna blow you up. And then we got a Rhino. The Rhino can hold 2 interceptor squads, which actually increases their threat range by 3 inches, because you can then disembark and then move, which is pretty good. Pretty classic Grey Knights stuff. And I'm really interested to see where Grey Knights end up. It seems like they have been doing just fine in Arks of Omen, which I think is nice for them. They caught a little bit of a nerf on their more laid back secondaries. Ritual or Purifying Ritual unfortunately got a nerf, which makes it was already a little tough to max. Now it's much less consistent than it was. It probably gets you like a 10, but they got that Teleport Assault, which is in some instances probably an easy max. So you win some, you lose some. And then not to mention the fact that they got a little bit cheaper. They're very good at killing Space Marines without Armor of Contempt. They have a lot of 2 damage weapons, like thousands of 2 damage weapons. And they kind of like they live in the realm of AP2. So Armor of Contempt kind of cut their output almost in half. And now they're going to be, you know, chewing through Space Marines much more consistently. So feels good. We got some Tau Empire to talk about. Speaking of people who like a universe in which there is no Armor of Contempt, Devin Swan from Team Canhammer is running some classic Tau. I know Devin in IRL events is running Imperial Guard. We elected for this invitational because the official release of Astra Militarum was so close to the rules lock for the invitational, and it was unlikely that they received a cleanup FAQ. We elected not to allow 9th edition IG in the invitational. There's a lot of stuff in the codex that's like real borked right now. And not even from a balance standpoint. There's just things that sort of functionally are you know, work not as intended. So we're going to hold off on that for at least for the invitational stuff, obviously, for a little bit. They are illegal currently in Season 7 pods. So if you're in the normal Season 7 events, you can play Imperial Guard. It's only for this event that we were going to hold off on them. Devin is, I think, playing Imperial Guard in real life, in IRL events. But he's back on his old Tau Empire that he took down the Season 4 Invitational with. This time with Farside Enclaves, though. So in lieu of Sunshark Bombers, given that they got the aircraft nerf, and Bombers especially being kind of double hit, the old double whammy on Bombers, making it so that they can't bomb on the first turn, and because they have to come in later, they then can't bomb until the third turn. Makes them much less appetizing to take. Their damage output for cost is still pretty solid, especially for the Sunshark. But I don't know if it's like another unit that deep strikes on turn 2 and shoots your opponent with direct fire guns is not exactly what Tau is looking for. And the niche that they filled in Tau, I don't think is really filled by the Sunshark anymore. Previously, they were good because your opponent, you know, if you play Tau and you played these Riptide battlesuits and these big Crisis battlesuit bricks, your opponent is not incentivized to move out of their line of sight blockers at all. So they're just going to hole up in their ruins, and they're going to try to beat you on passive secondaries. And the Sunshark Bomber gave you an out for that style of gameplay, where you could be inflicting damage on them over the course of the game, whether it's by bombing runs or by moving around their line of sight blockers and shooting them. And you really can't do that anymore, because if they have appreciable screening, they're going to chill on turn 1. You're going to sit around with your Riptides or whatever and reposition. They're going to screen aggressively round 2, and you're going to get very limited line of sight with your bombers. You'll kill what they give you, but if you have to wait until turn 3 to do any damage to your opponent's army, Tau doesn't often have the damage output to get out of the game. So instead of the Sunshark Bombers, we're just seeing a bunch of Crisis battlesuits. So we have a Fireblade for as an outlet for Exemplar of the Kauyon, with a couple marker drones. We then have Commander Farsight himself, the Great Man himself, with Exemplar of the Monka to give wound rerolls to the battlesuit unit. A Cold Star Commander with Precision of the Hunter. He's got the high output burst cannon, missile pod, own plasma rifle, and a thermonutronic projector. As well as a solid image projection unit, so he's difficult to kill on the swing back. And then these 2 big Crisis Battlesuit teams. So these are 5-member Crisis Battlesuit teams with 2 shield drones built in. I guess the second one has marker drones instead of shield drones. Alongside a bunch of defensive benefits. We have shield generators and stim injectors on one of the units, and Iridium Battlesuit on the other one to keep the units going. Good stuff. Crisis Battlesuits to get rerolls and blow people up. Seems pretty solid. Yeah, we're moving to Fusion Blasters, it seems like, chat. I mean, EP4, right? Like, good at shooting Space Marines, and I think that's what you got to deal with these days. Not necessarily the meta for this event. I wonder if people... I mean, I guess people are mostly playing what they're familiar with from Nephilim for the most part, but I also wonder if... people sort of expected a lot of Space Marines, and so they expected a lot of Space Marine hate, and so they took lighter armored stuff, which is why we're seeing so many Eldar, so many of these factions that aren't just relying on T4 and a 3+ save. But for that, we get those burst cannons and cyclic ion blasters. So we have like one, I guess, a high volume unit with the cyclic and the burst cannons, and then we have another unit that's going to fire a little bit longer range with the plasma rifles. Some crude hounds to do screening, good stuff, and then 3 Riptide battle suits, all ion accelerators, no burst cannons at all, which is pretty wild. Multi-trackers and target locks on them, as well as velocity trackers to get the +1 to hit against flying units. Not super relevant these days, but it still works. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty classic Tau fare. Switching the Sun Sharks for the Crisis battle suits. Moving on, we're going to get weird, chat. We've been talking about, this is kind of cutting edge of the meta so far, but Arne is playing some wild stuff today, everybody. This is a Chaos Demons Arcs Moment detachment, but it is running entirely Slaanesh Demons. So we are actually unlocking Allegiant Warp Storm abilities. We're not just relying on those silly old, the regular Warp Storm abilities that you get. We've actually got the Slaanesh ones available, which, if I remember correctly, is +1 to charge is the big one. Fight first on everything, and you can do mortal wounds to people if you like roll a morale check on them. That one's not as exciting. Well, I guess that is actually pretty good. It prevents actions is the last one. But for the most part, fight first and +1 to charge is pretty solid, especially because we're going to be doing it on so many Demonettes. So we have an Infernal Enrapturous Celeste. Celeste is the character, the 2 characters stacked on top of each other, and grants both the hit and wound rerolls to nearby units. So they can kind of embed themselves inside this huge wash of Demonettes and actually dramatically improve your damage output. And then we have plus the fact that 3 of these characters are Psychers, so we have a little bit of outlet for Warpcraft secondaries like Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual. The list is excellent at Reality Rebels because there's like no way it doesn't outnumber you on your table quarters. So it probably has 2 of the 3 secondaries on lock, and then it can just roll something else if it needs to. The Trance Reaver is the Warlord. And I'm actually not sure what its Warlord trait does. It has the Warlord trait to retain Warp Storm points. So in the early game, I guess it can bank for the more powerful Warp Storm abilities if it rolls low early. And if you don't need to push your Demonettes out, you don't need to improve their speed or heal them, then there's no reason not to have that. Especially since I think the Slaanesh Warlord traits, outside of stacking buffs on Keepers of Secrets, are kind of whatever. It's interesting. Oh, we do have Slothful Claws on the Torment Bringer, so that's the relic weapon for +1 damage. And turns off aura abilities, but only on their claw attack, not all of the attacks with Stormbringer. And then a ton of Demonettes. So 7 units of 10 Demonettes. Pretty straightforward. I mean, they're fast, they have a billion attacks, and they are awesome at taking objectives. I mean, that's true of basically any of the demon infantry, the troops options, but you can demonic manifest them in the center of the table, give them +1 to charge, and grab your charges out of Deep Strike and just start stringing your army across the stringing mass obstac across the middle of the table and just flip objectives all day long. There's then 3 units of Fiends. They're relatively efficient damage output and very fast, plus beast keyworded, so they can go through walls as well. And unlike the Seekers down here, but we have a bunch of Seekers to add some fast, high volume attacks, so they can kind of deal with enemy chaff units really, really easily. Whereas the Fiends are a little bit better against high resilient stuff because they have 2 and 3 damage attacks. The Seekers are basically they're just 7 attacks apiece, I believe, after their Seekers, their mount swings. So they're low impact but high volume and super duper fast. And then backed up by a bunch of Demonettes to take objectives from people. Pretty good stuff. If we go back to the main page here, the schedule for games is right here, chat. So that game in particular is happening on Monday. 9 chariots, too little. That's fair. Plague bearers are slow until you manifest them into the middle of the table. I do think plague bearers are. I mean, they're much cheaper now, which is good, but they're certainly the least exciting out of all of them. But the point for a lot of those troop units isn't necessarily going to be to like walk them at your opponent. It's going to be to manifest them. So, I mean, this list is going to definitely put, you know, you're going to have to put something on the table. And you can put a lot of Demonettes in threatening positions, especially towards the midboard. But then the ability to drop your opponent's leadership and then drop next to them and +1 to charge them, like offensively onto objectives, is huge for this list. Moving on, we can talk about Wolfvonmibu's Tyranids briefly. This army is not going to see play, chat, unfortunately, as we talked about before. It's running Behemoth with naturalized camouflage, so it gets additional +1 if the model is in terrain benefiting from light cover. It's got 2 Hive Tyrants, a Shard-Gullet Hive Tyrant, and a Reaper of Obliterax guy with a heavy Venom Cannon, so there's just a little bit of fire support. A Neurothrope for support powers, a bunch of Hormigons, which I think is sort of the going to be kind of the baseline for a lot of Tyranid lists moving forward. A set of Tyranid Warriors to get their Synaptic Imperative, exploding 6s in melee. A Death Leaper with her Warlord trait. Just a regular Lictor and a Pyrovore, a bunch of Pyrovores, excuse me, 2 individuals for screening, and then a unit of 3 Zoanthropes. So we do have the Zoanthrope Imperative active. And then, interestingly, a bunch of Mucilid Spores and 1 Screamer Killer. And the impetus behind the Mucilid Spores, I'm not sure I could entirely explain to you, chat. They're just big spore mines. So they you know, can really threaten objectives if you just hide them on your home objectives. That's pretty good. You can also deep strike them if you want to, which I guess is also pretty good. But they're ignored for victory conditions, and they're ignored for screening any deployments. So they don't impact the battlefield too much, but they are good defensively. They can hit you for on a 2+ hits for D6 mortals and on a 5+ hits for D3+3. So the amount of damage that they deal is insane. So they can sort of like mutually annihilate on objectives if your opponent's trying to come into you. And I think that's probably what they do. Is if you're you know, holding an objective with a Pyrobore or something, and you're just pushing all the Hormigons forward, you're worried about enemy obsec coming and touching the objective. But because the Mucilid Spores is on a 40 mil base and explodes within 3, then anything touching your objective is automatically going to trigger the spore to detonate. So you can always just be threatening damage on your opponent's models, which I think is pretty good. For 60 points, it's kind of a lot, but I don't know, it's kind of interesting. The list that did make it out of that game, however, is Jonah's list. As a little bit of you know, a little bit of a traitorous backstab. Jonah actually has a Swarmlord as his profile picture, but is playing Dark Angels. Of course, a Dark Angels player would be heretical like that. Terrible. Just terrible. Dark Angels is the one faction, or the sub-faction, I should say, out of Space Marines that I think has surprised me the most. Because I didn't know how well they would perform coming out of Arcs of Omen, given how difficult it was to build first or second company detachments, bringing entirely Deathwing or Ravenwing. And most of the time, Deathwing detachments are actually a lot easier than I anticipated, because you can bring... there's a lot of random units that have Inner Circle. Most of the characters have Inner Circle, and Ravenwing Black Knights actually have Inner Circle as well. So you can still bring a lot of the elite fast units in your Deathwing detachments, but most of the time people have just said, you know, F it, like Dark Angels are good enough as it is. And now with the massive points breaks that Terminators and a lot of the bikers have gotten, they're just able to take so much stuff that it doesn't really matter so much. You know, while I think everyone was rightly expecting Iron Hands to be the breakout from the new Space Marine buffs, I think that Dark Angels may actually be the #1 Space Marine chapter, which has caught me entirely off guard and is very cool. So this list has Azrael. He grants some CP back, and then also he has his bubble of invulnerable saves for nearby infantry and bikers. We then have 2 Talon Masters. One is running Rites of War. The other one's Arbiter's Gaze, so he ignores penalties and overwatches on 2s. And then the other one, running that Rites of War to grant objective secured to all these units. So because they're not in a Deathwing detachment, they aren't getting our objective secured innately. Because we're taking non-inner circle units in the detachment. But you can just grant it to them with the Rites of War aura, so it's actually probably fine. The Blade Guard Ancient in here, so he can make the Terminators fight on death, and a little bit of an interesting wombo combo you can do there, assuming that this list has an Apothecary. It does. There he is. Selfless Healer. If you're taking damage on your Terminator squads, you can actually eat the damage on the Cyclone Missile Launcher first, which sounds a little bit funny because you usually want to hold your special weapons until the end of the unit. You want to keep them alive as long as possible, but you want that to trigger the Blade Guard Ancient's ability to make them shoot on death on a 4+, and then if you get that, you get a free rocket launcher shot from them. They die, and then the Ravenwing Apothecary comes and brings them back for free. So you can kind of like get kind of a situational double tap with them, which is pretty interesting. He's got the Pennant of Remembrance to reduce damage on people on a unit that he points at every turn. And then we got some Blade Guard Veterans. These guys they're just very difficult to kill, and they can run up into the middle of the game, into the table, and score shock tag or Ozu Moment, excuse me, pretty well. And then, yeah, just a ton of Terminators. So it's 2 little Blade Guard veteran squads, and then 2 units of 5 Deathwing Terminators. We have that Ravenwing Apothecary. He's got that Selfless Healer. And then we also have 5 Ravenwing Black Knights. They're a good outlet for weapons of the Dark Age, so +1 damage on the plasma weapons. So they have 10 plasma shots. They can go from 2 damage up to 3. You can be re-rolling all your hits from Azrael. And then even if any of them die to the overcharged plasma, you can bring them back with the Apothecary next turn. So it's not the end of the world. A couple servitors do actions, and then 3 units of attack bikes. With multi-meltas. Yeah, good stuff. Pretty sweet. Now, I believe that while the list sits in Devastator Doctrine, the Super Doctrine for Ravenwing kicks on, so if it elects to sit in Devastator Doctrine, I don't believe they have to be in a detachment for that to work, in a Ravenwing detachment. So they will be moving faster. But I am gonna double check that to make sure I'm not misspeaking. Yeah, so while the Devastator Doctrine is active, all the Ravenwing models get +3 move, and then can advance and fire all their weapons as if they were assault weapons. So you get a 23-inch threat range, a 23-inch move, and then a shot with your multi-meltas. It is at -1, but you can be hit re-rolling from Azrael. So that's pretty good. Good stuff. That's not the only Dark Angels we have. We have more Dark Angels to talk about. Papers bring Dark Angels as well. We're going to talk about Genestealer cults first, though. Danny over here running some Genestealer cults. Now, this is an interesting Genestealer cults list because it's a little bit different than the normal list we see, which is typically a myriad cult list that brings the custom sub-faction abilities. This one is Twisted Helix, which grants +1 strength and move There is also a stratagem. It's not a Twisted Helix specific stratagem, but it is... Yeah, Rapid Advance is the name. It gives the vehicles, bikers, and Pure Strain Genestealers an auto 6 advance. And then because the Pure Strain Genestealers have an advance in charge, they can get, they have +1 inch of move, an auto 6 in advance, so they're moving 8, 9, 15 inches, and then can advance in charge because they can do that innately. So the speed that you get out of this army is actually pretty impactful. And then +1 strength, obviously melee, pretty solid as well. Lowernius, thanks for the re-up on your support, by the way. Your channel membership. I missed that pop up. So this one's running a Kellermorph and Nexos, the normal upgrades on them. Cranial Inlay on the Nexos, which is the CP regen, if I remember correctly. Yeah, a 5+ CP regen, and then Wormtooth rounds for the increased damage on the Kellermorph. The Unwilling Orb on a Magus to give it its deny at any distance, and then an Icon Ward. And then a bunch of units. As we see mostly in Genestealer Cult, they just are taking a ton of these MSU units. And sometimes Neophyte hybrids. This time we're running Acolytes, so we're going to be playing a lot more melee-oriented, but that sort of fits the Twisted Helix theme. We have 1 of 10, 1 of 9, 2 of 15, and 2 of 5 Acolyte hybrids. Almost all of them have Flamers. Yeah, not the 5s. One of the 5s does have Excavate, which can remove cover and defensible from an enemy terrain feature. I believe that it gives it difficult ground. Yeah, so you can make the terrain feature that your opponent is planning to hide behind and then breach through to get to the center objective. Give them -2 movement, which is very cute. I think probably one of the most underrated proficient planning upgrades in the Codex. So yeah, this was just a ton of hand flamers. All those Acolyte hybrids have this little they're swinging with an AP1 melee attack, I believe, which it previously was really sad thanks to Armor of Contempt reducing its AP0. Yeah, so their base is AP2, excuse me. So their base 3 attacks each, AP2 at strength 4. So that dropping to AP1, and especially against like a majority 2+ armor save armies, they would be putting them on a 3+, and their damage output wasn't that great. But in Twisted Helix with +1 strength, and then you're also not having to worry about Armor of Contempt, so you're putting people on a 4+ or a 5+ save. With a high enough volume of damage, you can actually just chip through tons of Space Marine armored infantry with that. And then we have massive numbers of hand flamers. So we're paying, how many hand flamers is this? 30, 49. So we're paying like 150 points, almost 147 points in hand flamers, to just be firing mass numbers of strength 4 or strength 3, excuse me, auto hitting attacks, which will eventually chew through a lot of things, especially if you can generate exposed tokens on them, but I'm not sure that that's that easy. We then have 3 units of Pure Strain Genestealers. 2 of them are going to be in Goliath trucks back here, so they can basically deploy the truck behind a line of sight blocking piece of terrain and then disembark the Pure Strain Genestealers 3 inches out of it. So while the first unit they came from below, so it's going to pregame move into a pretty reasonably defensive position in the center of the table, and then again use that 15-inch rocket using the rapid advance stratagem to get up the table and then advance and charge into something. The other 2 units are going to be disembarking and having a relatively similar threat range, especially if you can get the Goliath trucks on the first turn into like a piece of line of sight blocking terrain somewhere in the middle of the table. We then have some Metamorphs, which have they're a little bit more damaging than the Acolyte hybrids, but they also fight on death, so they're really good at. They do the Wolfen thing where they can get to the middle objective, and if your opponent is melee oriented, they just mutually annihilate with them. So they. If they're coming in to take the objective from you, the Metamorphs will just kill them on the swingback. A Sanctus with a sniper rifle, and then 3 units of Atalan Jackals. Somebody complained that I was mispronouncing Adela Jackals the other day, and now I'm not sure what way they wanted me to pronounce it. But they get grenade launchers and power weapons for free. So despite the fact that the unit is a little bit more expensive, they get their weapon upgrades. So the Jackals themselves, I guess, also benefit pretty well from the +1 strength. They go to strength 5 AP2, so basically the same melee profile as the Acolytes, although they are only a 4+ weapon skill, so not that exciting. Usually you see the Jackals in one big brick, so that the Icon Ward can regenerate people into them, but I think we're just bringing the Icon Ward to regenerate into these huge Acolyte hybrid bricks. Which makes a lot of sense. This list is sick, I think, all told. I streamed a couple games with a list very similar to this at Everwinter, and that was obviously in Nephilim format and pre all of the buffs that Genestealer cults got. But the list itself was like incredibly dangerous. That was, I think, the first time I'd ever seen speaking of Asuryani, that's maybe the first time I've ever seen a unit of swooping hawks killed, like actually removed from the table, was against this Genestealer cult list. But it's so hard to like keep all of your angles protected against the massive numbers of not only these pure strain Genestealers just threatening way across the midline of the table, but then also these Acolyte hybrid squads that are able to, you know, deep strike from wherever and then shoot you to death with hand flamers. They can drop in within 8 or 9 inches depending on how they're coming in, and then, or even closer. If they're running the proficient planning that lets you come up within 3. And then just flame you to death if you're not a super heavy armored infantry. The one thing I guess it's not, it may be relevant in this case, in this meta of this event, because there's multiple Asuryani, but moving on into the future, I'd be interested to see how the dynamic works between them and Space Marines, because Space Marines do have that Auspex scan in the bag, and it may just be that Space Marine armies are so CP hungry, which is typically the case, that they can't hold for the Auspex scan. But that was between that and Infiltrators being really widely played, which I think is going to continue to be the case. I think that a lot of the matchup's going to be really interesting. There are a lot of Space Marine tools that came out in the 8th edition codex that they've maintained moving into the 9th edition codex that really, really hurt Genestealer cults, and it may be that the pure strain Genestealers being on the table and not relying entirely on the Acolyte hybrids coming from reserve lets the list sort of put power through that. Like if they're screening you heavily with Infiltrators, you can just kill them with the pure strain Genestealers. And that might be just the game plan. We'll have to see. But, you know, an inopportune and an Auspex scan can just rip apart these Acolyte hybrid squads before they get to do anything cool. So, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see this list in action because I do think that, Genestealer called sweet. The Twisted Helix is really interesting. Yeah, that's why I said it's also relevant for Craft World, because Craft World has the Forewarned. It's Italian Jackals. All right, I gotcha. Somebody take these. Let me go find a picture of Italian Jackals. What do they look like? Do they already have enormous mustaches on them? They don't. So somebody needs to sculpt some like real big mustache right there. Nice curve on it. Just like that. That's unfortunately half the unit. They're very good. They're respecting, or at least two of the 5 are respecting COVID rules and wearing masks. But these two, they need some big mustaches on them. Good old Genestealer cults. So that is up against Dark Angels as well. So we have another Dark Angels army to talk about. This is a little bit different, but mostly it's kind of the same vibe. So this is from Paper, Nicholas Lochner, running Ezekiel, the other list I guess has no Psychers in it, which I wasn't really considering, but Ezekiel is an absolute powerhouse of a Psyker. All of the Dark Angel psychic powers are actually sick. I don't remember which one is named which, but one of them prevents you from doing actions and makes you fight last, and the other one removes Obsec from you. Let me look. And Ezekiel, because they are the Dark Angels specific, I think Interomancy discipline, is that what the Dark Angel specific discipline is called? It is what that's called. The Ezekiel gets +1 to cast all of those, just as an ability he has. So Mind Worm is 1 mortal wound, and you fight last on a 6. 18 inches, no line of sight required, and then with his +1 to cast, and it only needs a 5 to cast it, which is sick. The +1 to cast is also, it's better than reducing the warp charge value of the spell too, because it makes your denies harder, which is also great. Engulfing Fear removes objectives secured and can prevent the unit from performing actions if you beat their leadership value. And then Righteous Repugnance gives you hit and wound rerolls in melee. Both that and Engulfing Fear go off on a 7. But honestly, just having a fight last on a stick, like an offensive fight last on a stick, is really good at keeping these big Deathwing Terminator bricks alive. Because if you can, if you're forcing your opponent's biggest heavy hitter, especially if it has wound rolls in melee, to get over inner circle, if you're making it so that they have to they have to get hit by the Terminator squad before they charge in, like there's no way for them to profitably engage, and that just lets you like play the Deathwing game plan of hold the middle of the table with a bunch of transhuman Terminators until Kingdom Come. So Ezekiel in there, love to see that guy. We do have interestingly a Talon Master running the Heavenfall Blade and Imperium Sword, so he's +1 strength and attack on the charge thanks to Imperium Sword. And then the Heavenfall Blade is, I believe, a 2 damage power sword. Yeah, so it's +1 attack, strength 6, AP 4, 2 damage. And the Talon Master, I think, is base 4 and a 2+ weapon skill, so he goes to 5, 6, 7 attacks. That seems pretty good. Oh, he's only 3 attacks base, so it's only 6 attacks at strength 6. But that lets this guy, I mean, he's 18-inch move, so it lets him kind of use his use that mobility a little bit more aggressively. Whereas normally their damage output, like once they get stuck in melee, the Talon Masters are really, really sad. But if you put the resources into upgrading them into melee, they don't do too badly. They're still a lieutenant in melee, which is fine. So being able to range out and, like, kill a Devastator squad or something is certainly useful for this unit that moves super duper far. Now, I know in the past, I don't want to talk out my butt here. I'm showing my unfamiliarity with Ravenwing right now. But in the past, there was a stratagem to move after charging. Yes, and it still exists. So for Swift Strike for 2 CP allows a Raven unit to fall back after fighting in melee. So this little guy can come in, swing 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 4, 2 damage, probably clip a unit of 4 Space Marines. Maybe. Yeah, he kills 4 Space Marines on average, probably. He most likely drops a hit and a wound, maybe 2 wounds, so he kills like 3. But then for 2 CP, he just leaves. He gets that for free. And that's after shooting, so most oftentimes he's going to be able to go in and kill something and then run away. It does cost you a lot of CP, and I believe this list starts at 0, so that's not always going to happen, but it certainly... Or it starts at... How many CP are we at? We don't have a CP count, but I guess it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 expended. So... Oh, no, 6 expended. Yeah, it is at 0. So... That's pretty pricey, but lets you do free damage to your opponent and then hide behind your Deathwing Terminators, and that's always really, really good. Especially since it lets you, there's no requirement that you kill your opponent, so and they don't get to swing back at you. So it's if you pay the 2 CP, it's just free damage, and it lets your Talon Masters move around line of sight blockers that they would normally not be able to because they would be too exposed and then just be killed. And because you're moving 18 inches, it makes a ton of sense. Actually, this combo's growing on me, chat. I love this guy. Super good on Samael. What is Samael's damage output compared to that Heavenfall Blade guy? So the Heavenfall Blade guy is 6 attacks and strength 6 AP4. Samael is 5 attacks and strength 8 AP4. So it's like equivalent, right? Their damage output in most situations is going to be similar. Samael's better against like high toughness stuff, but the Talon Master's better against high volume. Seems fine. Either way, I guess it's good. The Talon Master's also faster than Samael. Samael only moves 15, but the Talon Master goes 18, so he's better at getting back into position afterwards. Does the Blade Guard Ancient only buff Blade Guard? It's a good question, actually. Oops. No. The Blade Guard Ancient does not. He buffs Blade Guard with +1 to hit, but the banner is any core unit. Any chapter core unit. So, you're still gonna... The main reason you're bringing him is gonna be for that shoot on death and to unlock the Pennant of Remembrance, and I think he's just the cheapest Ancient that you get. You could get like a chapter Ancient, I guess? Or a company Ancient, who's 65 versus the Blade Guard, who is 75. But you get the Primaris profile and a bunch of other upgrades on him for 15 points, so that's probably just better. This list in particular isn't taking Blade Guard, but the other Jonah's list that has the 2 Blade Guard units in it will benefit from that +1 to hit for Blade Guard veterans. Although, to be fair, there's a lot of situations in which Dark Angels don't really care about the +1 to hit, because if they're taking charges, which is normally how Dark Angels are like operating in melee, then they're already +1 to hit. So it actually doesn't really do that much, in all fairness. But I guess for the upgrade, you get what does a company Ancient do? You get +1 wound, +1 attack, and you upgrade your bolt pistol. Plus you get Primaris keywords, so you can transhuman and stuff. Oh, the Blade Guard Ancient has Inner Circle baked in? Does it? I'm not sure that's the case, Jeff. Is it just any Blade Guard unit and he's Blade Guard keyworded? I guess that would make sense. Then the Inner Circle upgrade is basically just baked in, and you get +1 strength and attack, or +1 wound and attack on top of it, which makes sense. Yeah, I have no idea where I would find where it says whether or not they get Inner Circle. Yeah, the Ancient is there to unlock the -1 damage relic. It's just a question of, like, you know, whether or not the other upgrades are worth it. gets the Deathwing keyword. All right, I'll take your word for it, chat. I don't know where in the codex it would say that, but I guess so. Yeah, I have no idea. But that sounds like a pretty good. That sounds good if that's how that works. I think it feels like you would take the Blade Guard Ancient anyway, because he's just better than the other guy. But if he gets the transhuman upgrade for free, then you might as well. Yeah, I guess you just you can just take Chapter Ancient for the cost that you would normally be spending on the upgrade for Inner Circle, so it makes sense. All right, 2 Deathwing Terminator squads, 1 Ravenwing Apothecary. This is the Rites of War guy, but no Selfless Healer on him. You can't take both together. You have to, if you ever want a double Warlord trait, you have to take one of the Chapter Warlord traits as one of them. As the second one. So we're paying to regen people, so it's a little bit tougher to do the combo we talked about earlier to make the rocket launcher shoot twice and then bring it back together, bring it back to life. But I think the Apothecary, because he's always going to be in the middle of your Terminator brick, he's a better recipient for Rites of War because he's always in a relevant position to grant it. So having Rites of War on like a Talon Master, for example, kind of forces you to put a Talon Master in danger because those guys generally don't want to be near combat. They are very squishy once they get hit. You know, they're 9-wound vehicles, so they just get knocked out of the sky pretty quickly. They don't have an invulnerable save, and 8-wound vehicles with no invulnerable save and no damage reduction. They basically they get very few defensive buffs at all. I guess they get Jank, right? But I think that only works against ranged attacks. Yeah, so yeah, they don't have any defensive melee. So once they get tagged in melee, basically, Talon Masters just die. But the Apothecary is always up, inside your units, giving you the 6-up damage ignore anyway. So that makes sense. And then just 3 Lane Speeder Vengeances to shoot a bunch of plasma shots at people. So this list doesn't have, compared to the other one, it has the same kind of volume of Ravenwing units. It doesn't have the big outlet for Weapons of the Dark Age, so it doesn't have that big hammer unit of Ravenwing Black Knights, but it's going to be playing more of a Deathwing brick because it has 20 Deathwing Terminators buffed by the Ancient. But again, it has that extra damage on the Talon Masters. The characters are much faster and harder to pin down, which I appreciate. Plus, it has Ezekiel, who's huge. Even if you're not using Ezekiel's abilities, he's just such a solid psyker, and he's one of the only librarians that has a good defensive stat line as well, because he has 5 wounds and a 2+ save and an invulnerable save, so he's basically a captain when it comes to receiving damage. Plus, he's in Inner Circle Infantry, so he's permanent transhuman too. So he can move up and perform psychic rituals and interrogations and stuff without really having to worry that he'll randomly get killed. Whereas librarians, just like Talon Masters, if librarians get tagged to melee, they just die. Except for Ezekiel, he's a tough cookie. I think every list would love more CP, chat. Yeah, Tigurius is cool too. Tigurius is cool because he has additional utility, but I guess Ezekiel. I didn't realize Ezekiel also has additional abilities on top too. He lets you shock assault in ongoing combats, which is really cool. So even if he's just chilling with your Deathwing Terminators and they get stuck into a prolonged combat, they're going to continuously get +1 attack. That's real good. Ezekiel, I was already sold on you. You can stop coming out with these additional abilities. All right. Speaking of factions that I'm relatively unfamiliar with, Let's talk about Disciples of Be'lakor. Dudes, I hope you're in chat here because I have no idea what your list does. So, good old Disciples of Be'lakor over here. So the Chaos Demons Army of Renown. We get an allied super heavy auxiliary. It has to come out of House Korvax. And if it takes a favored ability, it has to be Blessing of the Dark Master. So that's what we've done. We have a War Dog Brigand Squadron with that. And then, obviously, the Chaos Demons Arks of Omen detachment. So we're running Be'lakor, the Great Man himself, with his Warlord trait. So he can give hit rerolls to non-vehicle Disciples units. Definitely always take a ZQ. Definitely sold on that guy. The nice thing about Be'lakor is that not only is he a warp locus for these demon lists, so you can bring stuff in 6 inches away from people, but if their leadership's already low, he stacks 2 leadership penalties on them, so you can manifest closer if you're not trying to warp locus them in. So like these demonettes and bloodletters can the utility that we talked about previously of them coming in, you know, close to enemy objectives and then charging and obsecking everything. Is even more in play in a Disciples of Be'lakor army. The other benefit is that the Nurgling swarms in Disciples of Be'lakor get obsec from the Disciples detachment ability, whereas they wouldn't normally thanks to the Demon detachment ability. The Disciples one specifies that all troops gain it, whereas the Demon one specifies that non-swarms gain it. So basically, there's like 2 instances where you would get objective secured, and Nurglings get one of them. So they have objective security in these detachments, which is great. Plus, you're probably always gonna be taking them to screen out deep strikers and stuff, as we've been talking about this whole time. So just having Nurgling swarms is awesome. Nurgling swarms are low key really, really good. We even saw it at LVO where Nurgling swarms almost flipped a game on their head by eating a charge from Orc Stormboys, not dying, and killing the Orc Stormboy unit. And it's just randomly the fact that they're -1 to be hit permanently. Demonic Invulnerability means that like you can never consistently kill them, and they have a bunch of wounds, 4 wounds apiece, and Gene Rot Might on their melee weapons. Means you don't really want to get stuck in with them if your armor's not that great. And yeah, I mean, Nurgling swarms are just great. They're just super duper good. There is a unit of Beasts of Nurgle. So I have it on good authority that these guys are really good thanks to the Draught of Terror ability. So anytime somebody within 6 inches of a demon unit from your army, so you target it at the any morale phase, they regenerate wounds when enemy units flee. Beasts of Nurgle heal all of their damage at the end of each phase if you haven't removed them entirely. So at the end of the fight phase, for example, they take some damage, heal it back to full. If they've lost a full Beast of Nurgle, you then use Draught of Terror. You have a bunch of leadership debuffs on them because you're playing demons and Be'lakor is probably nearby. Then if you would regain wounds from the stratagem, one of them gets returned thanks to the ability, and because of the Beast of Nurgle ability, that then triggers, and that beast goes back up to full as well. So you could potentially get like 1.85 Beasts of Nurgle back from this, assuming that one of them is wounded, heals to full, and then another one comes back. Heals to full in the previous phase, and another one comes back. They're also they're not core, but they're not vehicles, which means you can point rerolls at them as well from Be'lakor. And the other benefits of rerolls obviously are going to be the flamers too. The flamers now they have to roll to hit, but that's not so bad. If Be'lakor's shrouded, stepping them across the table, he can point his command phase rerolls at them. And then like they don't auto hit, but they're 3+ to hit, rerolling everything. And that's just as good, generally speaking. You can't source +1 to hit, as far as I know, but that's fine. And then it's a bunch of flesh hounds because they're super cheap. Seems good. Yeah. The revive is super sick on Beast of Nurgle, so that unit like functionally doesn't ever die. as long as enemies are running away. If you hit somebody who has like exceptionally high leadership, you know, or low model count, or just tend to die really quickly, it doesn't work quite as well. But it's not like Beasts of Nurgle aren't worth 210 points for 3 of them anyway, because they're just going to be... they're so good at defending like a mid-board objective, because they have that big heroic intervention. And you just don't want to get near them. They'll just bog you down. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a Disciples of Be'lakor list. That one is, yeah, one that I know significantly less about. So I don't know if I can talk particularly... you know, super knowledgeably about it, but that's close enough. Inceptors couldn't touch them all game. Well, that doesn't seem like a great profile matchup for Inceptors. I guess there's also the fact that they're a really awkward defensive profile to kill. Like, assuming that you have to kill entire units of them. They're T6, so a lot of stuff is awkwardly like 3s and 4s, and if you're strength 5, then you're on 5s, which sucks. 7 wounds, so 2 damage is really weird, because you still have to convert 4. I guess like both 2 and 3, because 2 hits from 3 damage leaves them on 1, and 3 hits from 2 damage leaves them on 1. So you have to convert an extra 1 out of any of those damage profiles into a demonic invulnerability save that may just succeed a bunch of times. And then if you ever underswing, then they all come back. Is really gross. Their 4+ weapon skill hurts, but that's why the rerolls are there. You can also fish for, because their 6s turn into mortal wounds on the hit roll, not the wound roll, you can fish for 6s on their melee attacks if you're fully rerolling them from Be'lakor, which is good. So, yeah, I mean, pretty solid list. It mostly does demon things, but then also has all these internal synergies with the Disciples of Be'lakor. Plus, it has a bunch of Chaos Knights in it, which I guess adds some extra hitting power that demons wouldn't normally have, especially outside Greater Demons, because you can't take Greater Demons in Disciples of Be'lakor. I'm interested to see how demons end up. It feels like Disciples of Be'lakor is like the stronger game plan than regular demons right now, because I have a sneaking suspicion as we move forward, most of these Space Marine armies will just kill Greater Demons that show up near them. So the Disciples of Be'lakor game plan, where you're playing like a much more finesse-oriented and like kind of a tankier play, feels more consistent than Chaos Demons. But I think that remains to be seen. I think it's interesting. We got Grey Knights. I think we basically talked about we've essentially talked about this list already. It is a Prescient Brethren list, so it has all of the same synergies that we discussed previously. We have the Psychic Epitome Brotherhood Librarian. We have the Tech Marine with Divination, sort of the same deal. This guy does have Unyielding Anvil, so he's got an Obsec aura, so he can grant that to Interceptors or the Nemesis Dread Knights, which is huge. And then the Grandmaster Dread Knight and Keldor Drago, like we saw. The difference here is that we are taking less Interceptors and less utility units. So we're down to 2 strike squads, no additional units, and only 25 Interceptors. Only 25 Interceptors instead of the full 30. And I think that we have cut upgrades off the Nemesis Dread Knights compared to Patrick Prax's list to get another Nemesis Dread Knight in there. We still have the Rhino to extend the threat range on the Interceptors. And the Dread Knights are kitted out with all their ranged weapons, but they only have their Dread Fists in melee, which is a fine melee profile. I think having both of them gives them +1 attack. But it's not quite as exciting as hitting people with the sword. So, you know, I think it's fine. Especially if you're assuming you're going to be punching multi-wound infantry, I think the fist is what you want, like, generally anyway. Because the big sword on the Dread Knight is a random damage value. Which like kind of sucks against like 2 or 3 wounders. Yeah, so the fist is... Oh, it doesn't grant them extra attacks. I apologize. So it's 5 attacks at strength 12, AP3, 2 damage, versus taking this sword gets them to strength 10. Either gives you a multi-attack profile or a d6 damage profile, and I guess the downside there would be that the D6 damage profile is inconsistent if you're not punching vehicles. But even then, you save a bunch of points. You save 15 points apiece, which is fine. Why does nobody take Terminators or Paladins? Yeah, so generally speaking, Grey Knights a lot of times want to have like the maximum volume of units because each individual unit that they have is a psyker, which lets them complete their secondaries better, and it lets them cast their support powers better. And they want to be using their melee weapons, so having the faster units lets them get to melee faster, and neither the Paladins aren't they aren't harder to kill enough like over the regular interceptors or strike squads that they won't just die on the crackback. So you want like cheap units that are fast, and Terminators are exactly neither of those things basically. So these interceptors, if you compare an interceptor to a Terminator, like the damage output both in shooting and melee is the same, but you get less psychic powers, and like comparatively point for point you get less psychic powers and less melee attacks and less guns. So it's just not as great either way. I do think that I mean, we saw some lists. I talked about Matt Laura's list from LVO. There are some lists that bring Terminators in the troop slot, which like sort of act as a little bit more defensively on home objectives, which is good. And you can bring Paladins just because like they're individually, like just 3 Paladins is a pretty good like sort of little mini unit. But if you're comparing, if the choice is between Interceptors and any of those options, you're almost always going to take Interceptors. All right, moving on. We're getting to the home stretch here, everybody. We got some Necrons to talk about. So Josie is running some non-obsec Necrons. So we're running Relentlessly Expansionist and then Superior Artisans, which I think is a floating reroll, if I remember correctly. Yeah, a reroll on a wound roll every time the unit goes to shoot or fight. But the difference here is that we're focused a little bit more on the stuff that doesn't hold objectives. So not worried so much about being objective secured if you can kill your opponent. I think generally speaking is going to be the game plan. We have a lot of free or no force slot units. We have 2 units of Crypto Thralls to go with the 2 Cryptex. 2 individual plasma sites to go with the destroyers, a chronomancer and a technomancer with the Veil of Darkness to pick up a unit and drop it, and then just a bunch of little units. So the Silent King is in here as the warlord in the Lord of War slot. We also have, now thanks to that Supreme Command update, so you can actually take your Supreme Commanders in your list, a Hexmark Destroyer with the old school Gauntlet of the Conflagrator. So he can potentially shoot people for mortal wounds with his gun, and then also, in addition, shoot his regular gunshots, which will trigger additional shots. And I think, especially as there's so many people rocking like turn 1 deep strikes and offensive deep strikes, and strategic reserves, of course, the Hexmark Destroyer can use the Etheric Interception to come in out of reserve and shoot them. So if you're trying to use strategic reserve to bring in like infantry units, the Hexmark can actually, I don't know if I would say that like it necessarily counters them entirely, but it can certainly punish them. I can certainly see a situation where somebody brings in a Devastator drop pod, disembarks the Devastators out of it, and you're able to put the Hexmark Destroyer in a position where it can see 1 Devastator and then shoot the unit and kill like maybe 2. And that drops that significantly cuts the power level of that Devastator squad that's dropping down. Whereas you can probably engineer a situation where only a single Devastator can shoot you back, and it's unlikely to kill you. Or even if they're dropping aggressively enough, you can shoot them from behind Lookout Sir. And in that case, they can't even do anything about it. So then there's 2 units of Scorpic Destroyers for some melee punch. A Catan shot of the Nightbringer, as well as a Transcendent Catan. So we're actually rolling randomly for the powers of the Transcendent Catan for the chance that it doubles up on a power with the Catan shot of the Nightbringer. So we're basically going to be trying to duplicate Sky of Falling Stars if we can. You can also then, if the Transcendent Catan hits a useful power, as long as you haven't selected a power at the start of the game, you can Strange Echoes into it. So you could switch the Nightbringer's Gaze of Death for a longer range power, potentially, if you want to. Now, there's 2 Heavy Destroyers, which is pretty normal. 2 Doom Scythes is interesting because there isn't a... we don't need... I talked previously about the Doom Scythe plus Deceiver combo, and you don't need that anymore because the Doom Scythe will always be in Strategic Reserve. But I think that this list wants to play kind of passively. And so the Doom Scythes coming in round 2 is going to be fine. And we actually watched these things play over the weekend. And coming in round 2 for the Doom Scythe, they don't care as much about bombing mechanics. They always, if they overcommitted on turn 1, they always died and they never got their points back. So the fact that they can only come in on turn 2 kind of requires that you play more passively with them, which is, I think, the correct way to play Doom Scythes anyway. And especially... given the fact that you have a floating wound reroll for the laser beam on them, the death ray, and there's gonna be a lot of light chaff units that the Tesla cannons are really good at killing. I think the Doom Scythes are actually kind of poised to hit the meta pretty well. And your opponent can't really do as much about it on the first turn as they could previously. So you're not required to take a Deceiver alongside them to make the whole combo work where they don't die if you go second. They'll just go second normally now. So yeah, I guess like the Transcendent Catan is basically just an upgrade from the Catan shard of the Deceiver, and you're just always strategic reserving them instead of sometimes strategic reserving them. And I guess if you look at it that way, the Doom Scythes didn't actually change that much in their function. Whereas like Harpies and Sun Sharks, the other aircraft that you saw, pretty often lost a lot of their damage output because they no longer get their bombing runs as frequently. So I don't know, that's kind of interesting. This is just really wild, and I think I'm really excited to see it play because I think it's the most off. It may be the most off the wall list on the lineup here. I think maybe Cmob's Tyranids is pretty interesting, but I think this one is very unique. Multiple Catan shards is really cool. Running pregame moved at Necrons, but no obsec on them is also very cool. Like we can pregame move our Scorpic Destroyers into an aggressive position behind line of sight blocker, like in the center of the table. And then we have like fire support from the Locust Heavy Destroyers and the Silent King to keep your opponent playing relatively cagey. And then the Doom Scythes can come in and you can kind of just like full send with everybody. And if you can double up Sky of Falling Stars and do a bunch of indirect fire damage to your opponent, then the you sort of force them to come into you, and at that point then you're just laughing. So I like this one. You're just checking the Blade Guard Ancient can't take a sword. Okay. I don't... What is... Alright. I don't think I ever said he could take a sword. He just gets he gets an upgraded pistol from the regular Ancient. Moving on, we got the opponent for the Necrons, Adeptus Sororitas. So this is, like I said, this is a sort of classic matchup because we have the two OG factions fighting each other. The OG top of the metagame, Adeptus Sororitas and Necrons, that we saw play so many times in Warzone Nephilim, and we get one last shot at it before they see, I think, dramatically less play. So Beef Supreme over here taking Bloody Rose. And I think this is generally going to be normal Bloody Rose stuff. But I think the interesting thing about Adeptus Sororitas is that their game plan has almost become more consistent with the upgrade to Leap of Faith, because they no longer care so much about the volume of miracle dice they get. They only care about the quality. And if they're generating a high enough volume of miracle dice, then they have, whereas they might have needed to generate a lot of miracle dice to be able to just burn it randomly for Leap of Faith, now they only ever need to drop, they only can drop 5 dice to Leap of Faith, and the dice that they have to drop have to be of greater value than the ones that they would previously, because you would see them like a lot of times miracle like a 1 on an advanced roll or something just to add to the Leap of Faith tally. But now that they score points based on the facing of the miracle die that they sacrifice to Leap of Faith, as long as you're not forcing them to use their high value miracle dice, they can just score passively, and they still retain defend the shrine, and they still retain access to banners, and they're still very good at doing banners. So despite the fact that they've lost Armor of Contempt, the faction plays very similarly to how it did, but oftentimes they'll end up with more miracle dice than they would have previously in a similar situation. So if you're not pressuring Adeptus Sororitas, they can still just dramatically outscore you. And while like their game plan is a little bit, or is significantly less what's the word? Consistent than it was, it's still there. And they're still doing something. So we brought all the Adeptus Sororitas All-Stars. Mention the Ancient because it was funny how you pay for a worse weapon loadout. Yeah, well, I think neither of the Ancients have melee weapons, do they? Does the regular Ancient have one? I think you have to switch your pistol for it, maybe. Yeah, so you start with a worse weapon, but you can upgrade for a melee weapon. And I guess they're free now because everything's free in Space Marines. But yeah, I guess like it's probably 6-1 half as the other. You're significantly harder to kill as a Blade Guard Ancient, but you do significantly more damage as a Company Ancient. So I don't know. You probably value being harder to kill more because that's the whole game plan. If your Blade Guard Ancient is hard to kill and he makes all of your Deathwing hard to kill, you're hoping that your Deathwing are going to be able to make up for the damage that he's not doing. And nobody's going to bring a Company Ancient because they want it to be a beat stick. They're going to bring a Company Ancient to buff their huge brick of like idiot tanky boys. All right, so we got all the characters here. All the special characters for Adeptus Sororitas, Celestine, and the Gemini Superior, Ephrael, Stern, and Kaiganel, and Morvenval. 2 Battle Sister squads, or excuse me, 1 Battle Sister squad, 1 Initiate squad. Or Novitiate squad. 2 small units of Secrescents, as well as a Dogmata. A second Dogmata. So we have 2 outlets for Obsec onto different units, and one of them gets to bring Refrain of Blazing Piety, so we actually get to do a little bit of mortal wound damage in addition to Ephrael, Stern, and Kaiganel. So getting like the equivalent of like 2 smites a turn is actually pretty useful. We then have Beacon of Faith on the Dogmata, and so the interesting on the second Dogmata, and the interesting combination there is that if you are relying on Leap of Faith to be able to score a lot of your points, the Beacon of Faith gives you an additional miracle dice that can only be spent on Acts of Faith performed by the Dogmata, but you can still discard it to other effects. So you can discard the Beacon of Faith miracle die to Leap. And so building to get the maximum number of miracle dice generations, so just try to basically fish for high numbers to get big Leap of Faith points, is kind of part of the game plan now, which is pretty interesting. So unlike the previous version where you'd be giving up a Warlord trait to force, and if you wanted to score Leap of Faith with it, you would be forced to then use that miracle die on the character who may not necessarily need it. So you're just kind of wasting your Warlord trait at that point. Whereas now, even when you're not using it for an active faith, it is still super useful. a bunch of little Seraphim squads. So 2 little Seraphim squads, 5 apiece to do actions and shoot. 2 big Zephyrim squads, a 9er and a 10er with penance, and a little one of 5. And then a Retributor squad. We are in Bloody Rose. So the Retributors can shoot on death with their the stratagem out of the supplement. A Rhino, which is also going to be able to pregame move. And then a single Armiger Helvren, this one running Hunters of Beasts. So +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. Interestingly, no Mysterious Guardian. But that's probably fine. I like the Armiger Helvren. It brings a unit that Sisters don't have great access to. I guess it competes kind of directly with the Castigator, but for 20 points more, it has strictly better guns. And it's like probably equivalent to kill. It's actually much harder to kill. It doesn't get Axe of Faith, I guess. But the Castigator's firing the same number of Strength 7 AP 1 2 damage shots, whereas the Helvren's at AP 2 3 damage. So it's much, much better at shooting. Which makes sense. That seems fine. And it gets +1 to hit sometimes. And it has a heavy stubber on it. Definitely seems like a no-brainer over the Castigator. Now, the combination that you typically see is Mysterious Guardians on these Armigers, because that gives you turn 1, like the equivalent of turn 1 deep strikes. So alongside the Rhino pregame moving, you can actually kind of alpha your opponent out of the game, really, in a lot of situations, especially if you bring more than one Armiger Helvren. You don't want to, like, force the Armigers too much, because they don't have any internal synergy with Sororitas. So you're not, like, they're not generating you Miracle Dice, and they're not like using your Miracle Dice. But the fact that you can kind of 1-2 punch and then use the Rhino and the stuff that it disembarks to engage things and draw focus from the Armigers means that in some situations where you can't just rely on your sub-faction, or your secondaries, excuse me, to just win you points on scoring, you can actually just kill your opponent. We're not doing that in this case. We're just using it as fire support, but I think that's an interesting, like, just direction for any Imperialist, but also specifically Adeptus Sororitas to build into, which I'm interested to see how it ends up. We saw Custodes do it over the course of the weekend, and I think a lot of lists are starting to incorporate that technology, but it's one of the most interesting things. Let's petition for a company champion. Let's can we not continuously buff Space Marines? That'd be great. Do random Space Marine data sheets need to be buffed? I think it's okay. I think they're okay how they are. It's fine. We can stop. Ash. A lot of people said that they were excited to see Ash's list. So let's talk about some frickin' Orks, everybody. Ash is running Goffs. She was normally had registered for almost every invitational so far that she's qualified for with Sisters. I think literally every single one, right? I don't believe that she's played anything but Sisters in the invitational. But today, we're not doing Sisters anymore. Unlike Beef Supreme, Ash does not believe in the power of the Adeptus Sororitas any longer. She believes in the power of the Orks to score 100-point games, which they certainly can do, especially if you go first and your opponent doesn't have any fight last effects. And if you do that, you probably win. Congratulations, you won the stat check. So we're running Goffs for extra damage, +1 strength and exploding 6s in melee. A Beast Boss on Squigosaur with Brutal but Cunning, so competitive edge attacks. Whenever you fail your attack, you get to swing another time. A Beast Hide Mantle. Boss Zag Struck. A couple units of Gretchen to get the good bits. 2 units of Beast Snag a Boys. I'm gonna dive into the future here, having forgotten what else is in this list, and say that there's kill rigs to put them inside. 2 units of Commandos, so we can screen out forward deploy, and also Alpha Strike people. Big unit of Mega Knobs and Truck Boys, probably go inside a Battle Wagon. Alongside 3 units of Squig Hog Boys. 3 units of Storm Buys, 1 of 5, 2 of 10. 2 kill rigs to put those Beast Snag a Boys inside. Crazy. A truck. And another truck. So honestly, this is pretty stock standard orc list. It's going to go first. It's going to put a bunch of stuff into transports. You do have the opportunity, because you have the truck boys, you can put the mega knobs. You can with advance in charge and a disembark after moving the truck, you get sort of an insane threat range out of the mega knob unit. So there are situations where you can actually sort of maybe bottom one wah to get your advance in charge and your mega knobs and really punish your opponent for moving to the center. But you can also the game plan is generally going to be to move to everything to the middle of the table and then wah turn 2, and you get charges with your whole army onto their whole army, and you probably win. The fact that you don't have a lot of objectives secured in this list, in fact almost none, it's just the Gretchen and the Beastnaga boys, doesn't matter so much because you're trying to alpha your opponent off their objectives. So you have the Squeakhawk boys, which are super fast with advance and charge. All the Storm boys are super fast with advance and charge. The stuff disembarking from the kill rigs is super fast because they're going to get the 3-inch disembark and then an advance and charge. So you can engage people on basically every single objective on turn 2. I mean, I think we've seen orcs like do their thing quite enough. If you want to see a list like this play, you can watch like the LVO top 8 and watch Chad and Aiden just do this to people over and over again. But yeah, orcs doing orc stuff. If they go first, it's great. And if you can't answer the fact that they're super aggressive, that's also great. And if they go second and you shoot them a bunch, it's sad for them. And that's just about how orcs go. So you know, there it is. It's certainly an orc list. Very good. And then last but not least, I think similarly, this is, I guess part of it is that we talked about how this bracket right here, these last 4 lists, is basically, these players, you know, maybe didn't get the memo, or I guess Ash did, that we had moved to Arks of Omen. So these lists are lists that we've seen very similar varieties of over the course of the last, like, full year of play. So these ones I have less to talk about, because I think I've talked about them in almost every other Tactical Tuesday that we've done. So this one's, I mean, Dylan Usher here, he's playing Blades of Light Harlequins. There are 7 Star Weavers filled with Harlequin troops. 2 Death Jesters, one with Harvester of Torment to get the exploding attacks, the other one with Rift Ghoul to do mortal wounds on top of normal damage. 2 Shadow Seers. One of them gets Mirror Architect, the new and improved Mirror Architect. And then a Troop Master with Foot in the Future for the big long charge. Chegarax Rose. This one does have... it is Player of the Light, but not... Queen of something? Queen of Shards? The one where you ignore invulns on high numbers. I guess we're not playing that. But otherwise, it's a Harlequins list that does Harlequin stuff. I think the fact that I mean, I've talked about it before on the channel, but the fact that the Harlequins lost a point of invulnerable save across the board is not great for them, but also I don't think like sort of dumpsters the faction or by any stretch of the imagination. They're still going to do their thing, and they're going to enjoy doing it, and they're going to look great doing it too. They're the situations where they randomly dice their opponent out of being able to kill them is going to happen slightly less often. But we just watched Harlequins in a Yannari list over the weekend. You know, basically just get stuck into big units and still be hard enough to kill that they survived a couple turns. And I think that trend is going to continue. We're having a 5+ invulnerable save on top of a bunch of other stacked defensive benefits is good enough. They don't really need the 4+ invulnerable save. It does make the army easier to deal with shooting, but that's why we see like Mirror Architect and the double Shadow Seers like sort of being brought back in to try to protect things, so that they don't get just blown out by a good turn of shooting into bad luck of the Laughing God. So it's good to see Harlequins like still kicking after they got such a massive nerf, and I'm excited to see that game happen. I think the Harlequins versus Orks is really interesting because the Orks will probably struggle to kill the Harlequins before they get out of their transports, but Harlequins don't want to run into interrupts. So they're going to rely on their shooting to kill a bunch of the Orc vehicles, but I don't know how well they're going to be able to kill the Orcs inside as well. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. But yeah, that's all the lists, everybody. We did it. We talked about all of them. I think the interesting ones, the interesting games I'm really interested in, Ashley versus Patrick should be a good one. These are both like they're very interesting. I mean, the Grey Knights build is relatively standard, but the fact that they're both going to be trying to trade these big hammer blows with units, like these little units that are going to just nuclear missile out against each other is going to make the game very technical, and I'm very excited about that. I am excited thematically for Doots and Headstrong because it is Grey Knights versus Chaos Demons. That'll be kind of fun. And then Sororitas versus Necrons. I'm actually really interested to see Josie's list in action because it's just like it's very off the wall compared to what we typically see or would expect to see with like Mefrit or Nylock Necron lists. So maintaining a ancient dynasty sub-faction is really cool. So I'm excited to see that one too. But anyway, that's all the list. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks everyone for coming and hanging out and chilling with me while I talk about the games. Like I said before, the games are going to be live starting tomorrow. So 7 a.m. bright and early tomorrow, U.S. Eastern Time. So about 13 hours from right now is going to be... Is there a Grey Knight Tide that's anti-demon? I believe that there is. You just never take it. But I don't know what it does. I think Grey Knights are so baked into their normal Tide gameplay, I don't think they ever change. Because Mortal Wounds are just as good against demons as anything else. Yeah, they give the Tide of Banishment. It reduces demon leadership, and you get to reroll hit and rule rules of 1 against them. I mean, I guess that if you don't need the extra range from Convergence and you're shooting at them, that is like strictly better. But once you get into melee, you just want to be in Convergence anyway and spend the CP on rerolling and getting Mortal Wounds. So I don't know. Yeah, so 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. We also have that game happening tomorrow evening, 9 p.m. U.S. Eastern. And then you can check it out, tts40k.com/invitational. For all of the schedule. They're all on the schedule right now. You can go to the YouTube links that are in the streaming schedule, and you can hit the notification. There's a notification button there. There's a notify me button so that there will be a little notification when that goes live so that you can make sure you don't miss it. And if you're on Twitch, they will be live on Twitch as well. So if you want all of the cool Twitch chat features, you can do that. Then you'll get all the sound effects you like, you know? So that'll be exciting. All right, everybody. I am going to be done. So thanks, everyone, for hanging out with me. We'll be back to normal Tactical Tuesday stuff next week, I promise. But today, we're talking all about Invitational. And I'm psyched for the Invitational to happen because I think it's going to be some sweet games of 40k. So with that, remember to keep it classy, folks. And have happy wargaming. Have happy Invitational watching, even. And I'll talk to you later.